"You're too old for this job, Frank. Times have changed." The words cut through the air of the hotel manager's office like a blade, each syllable designed to wound and dismiss. Michael Carter, 29 years old, with his MBA diploma still fresh on his wall, delivered the ultimatum with the casual cruelty of someone who had never experienced the humiliation of being discarded for something as inevitable and uncontrollable as aging. Frank Sullivan stood perfectly still in his burgundy bellhop uniform, the same uniform he had put on with pride every morning for 23 years at the Las Vegas International Hotel. At 67, his posture remained straight, his appearance impeccable, and his dedication to excellence unwavering. But none of that seemed to matter to the young man sitting behind the polished mahogany desk, scrolling through spreadsheets that reduced decades of loyal service to numbers that no longer fit the company's optimization targets. The meeting had been scheduled as a performance review, but Frank had known from the moment he received the appointment notice that this was going to be something else entirely. Michael Carter had been making his intentions clear for weeks through passive-aggressive scheduling changes, assignment modifications, and the kind of systematic exclusion from decision-making processes that older employees learned to recognize as the precursor to forced retirement. "The hospitality industry is evolving rapidly," Michael continued, not bothering to look up from his laptop screen as he recited what sounded like a prepared script. "We need team members who can adapt to new technologies, embrace innovative service methodologies, and represent the dynamic image that today's guests expect from a premium establishment." Each phrase was carefully chosen corporate speak, designed to sound professional while delivering the message that Frank's experience, knowledge, and 23 years of building relationships with the hotel's most important guests were now considered liabilities rather than assets. Frank had heard variations of this speech before, directed at other longtime employees who had been systematically pushed toward early retirement as Michael implemented what he called workforce modernization initiatives. The 58-year-old head housekeeper had been reassigned to less visible duties before eventually accepting a buyout package. The 61-year-old concierge had been replaced by a computer kiosk and a 25-year-old guest experience coordinator, who knew how to operate social media but couldn't remember regular guests' names. Now it was Frank's turn to be discarded in the name of efficiency and cost reduction. The irony wasn't lost on him that the hotel's most valuable relationships and institutional knowledge were being eliminated to save money, while the very relationships and knowledge that had made the hotel legendary among discerning travelers were walking out the door with each forced retirement. What Michael Carter didn't understand, what his MBA program had never taught him, was that Frank Sullivan wasn't just another employee whose duties could be transferred to someone younger and cheaper. Frank was the institutional memory of the Las Vegas International Hotel, the keeper of relationships and traditions that had been built over decades of exceptional service. Frank knew which suite Frank Sinatra preferred when he visited, and how he liked his whiskey served. He remembered that Katharine Hepburn always requested fresh gardenias in her room, and that she preferred to use the service elevator to avoid encounters with fans. He could navigate the complex protocols required when foreign dignitaries stayed at the hotel, and he understood the subtle but crucial differences between how to serve old Hollywood royalty versus new entertainment industry celebrities. More importantly, Frank possessed something that couldn't be taught in hospitality management courses or learned from training manuals: the intuitive understanding of human nature that allowed him to anticipate guests' needs before they articulated them, to handle delicate situations with discretion and wisdom, and to represent the hotel's values through his every interaction. Frank had diffused arguments between famous couples, discreetly managed medical emergencies involving high-profile guests, and maintained the confidentiality that allowed celebrities and politicians to feel safe staying at the hotel. He had built relationships with guests that spanned decades, relationships that brought repeat business and referrals that couldn't be quantified on Michael's spreadsheets but were worth millions of dollars in revenue. But to Michael Carter, Frank was simply a 67-year-old employee whose salary could be replaced by hiring 2 younger workers at half the cost, workers who would never question new policies, never reference the way things used to be done, and never represent the kind of old-fashioned service standards that Michael considered outdated and inefficient. "I've prepared a generous early retirement package," Michael said, finally looking up from his screen with the kind of practiced smile that was meant to suggest magnanimity while delivering a non-negotiable ultimatum. "The company recognizes your years of service, and we want to make this transition as comfortable as possible for you." The word transition was particularly galling because it implied choice and collaboration in a decision that had already been made unilaterally. Frank wasn't being offered retirement. He was being forced out through the kind of age discrimination that companies had learned to disguise as voluntary departure incentives. Frank had seen this script played out with other longtime employees. The generous retirement package would be less generous than it appeared once health insurance costs and early retirement penalties were factored in. The transition would involve training his replacement while watching his responsibilities be divided among younger employees who had no understanding of the relationships and institutional knowledge they were inheriting. Most painfully, the comfortable departure would require Frank to pretend that he was choosing to leave rather than being pushed out, maintaining the fiction that age discrimination wasn't occurring, while allowing management to claim they were simply accommodating an employee's desire to retire. Frank had no desire to retire. At 67, he remained healthy, energetic, and passionate about his work. He took pride in his ability to provide exceptional service, and he found genuine satisfaction in the relationships he had built with guests and colleagues over more than 2 decades. The idea of spending his days in forced leisure while watching the hotel's service standards decline under inexperienced management felt like a death sentence rather than a reward. But Frank also understood the reality of his situation. Michael Carter held all the institutional power, and the company's policies had been structured to make resistance futile. Fighting the decision would likely result in termination for cause, elimination of any retirement benefits, and the kind of negative references that would make finding other employment impossible for someone his age. The meeting continued with Michael outlining the details of the retirement package, the timeline for Frank's departure, and the expectations for how the transition would be managed. Throughout the presentation, Michael maintained the tone of someone doing Frank a favor, as if forced retirement at 67 was a gift rather than discrimination disguised as corporate policy. Frank listened in silence, maintaining the professional demeanor that had served him well throughout his career while internally grappling with the reality that his working life was being ended against his will by someone who had never bothered to understand what Frank contributed to the hotel's success. What neither Frank nor Michael knew was that their conversation was being overheard by someone whose presence in the hotel would transform this moment from a simple case of workplace age discrimination into a profound lesson about the value of experience, the wisdom that comes with age, and the difference between efficiency and excellence. Elvis Presley had been walking down the hotel's administrative corridor, heading to a meeting with the entertainment director about his upcoming shows, when he heard voices coming from Michael's office. The door was slightly ajar, and Elvis had paused when he heard the tone of the conversation, the familiar cadence of someone in power, dismissing someone without power. Elvis had encountered Frank Sullivan many times during his stays at the hotel over the past several years. Frank had always provided exceptional service with a combination of professionalism and personal warmth that made Elvis feel genuinely welcome rather than simply accommodated. Frank remembered Elvis's preferences, anticipated his needs, and handled the complexities of celebrity guest service with a discretion and competence that was increasingly rare in the hospitality industry. More importantly, Elvis had observed how Frank treated everyone with the same respect and attention to detail, regardless of their fame or social status. Frank's service philosophy seemed to be based on the idea that every guest deserved the best possible experience, and his commitment to that principle was evident in every interaction Elvis had witnessed. As Elvis stood outside Michael's office, listening to the young manager systematically dismantling Frank's career and dignity, he felt a familiar anger rising in his chest. This was the same kind of casual cruelty he had witnessed in the entertainment industry, where powerful people discarded experienced talent in favor of younger, supposedly more marketable alternatives. without regard for the human cost of such decisions. Elvis had seen talented musicians pushed aside by record executives who believed that age automatically meant obsolescence. He had watched experienced producers and sound engineers replaced by younger workers who knew the latest technology, but lacked the artistic judgment and relationship skills that come only with years of experience. The entertainment industry's obsession with youth and novelty had destroyed countless careers and wasted enormous amounts of talent and institutional knowledge. Elvis had benefited from working with experienced professionals who had taught him invaluable lessons about music, performance, and the business side of entertainment. The idea that such people should be discarded simply because they had reached a certain age struck him as both wasteful and morally wrong. As Elvis listened to Michael's presentation about workforce modernization and optimization targets, he recognized the same flawed thinking that had led entertainment companies to prioritize short-term cost savings over long-term excellence and relationship building. The young manager was making the classic mistake of assuming that efficiency and excellence were the same thing, that reducing costs automatically improved performance, and that institutional knowledge and relationship capital were expendable luxuries rather than competitive advantages that took decades to develop. Elvis had learned through his own career that the most successful organizations were those that found ways to combine the energy and innovation of younger workers with the wisdom and experience of older professionals. The best recording sessions he had participated in involved teams that included both veterans who understood the craft and newcomers who brought fresh perspectives and technical skills. When Michael finished his presentation and began waiting for Frank's response, Elvis made a decision that would transform both men's understanding of what real value meant in any professional environment. Elvis knocked gently on the doorframe and stepped into the office, his presence immediately changing the entire dynamic of the conversation. Both Frank and Michael looked up in surprise, clearly not expecting to be interrupted by one of the world's most famous entertainers during what was supposed to be a confidential personnel discussion. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important," Elvis said pleasantly, though his tone suggested that he was well aware of exactly what he was interrupting and that he considered it very important indeed. Michael quickly stood up, clearly flustered by Elvis's unexpected appearance but trying to maintain professional composure. "Mr. Presley, what a surprise. I'm Michael Carter, the operations manager. Is there something I can help you with?" Elvis's response was diplomatic but pointed. "I was walking by and couldn't help but overhear part of your conversation. I hope you don't mind, but Frank here has provided me with exceptional service over the years, and I have a personal interest in making sure the hotel continues to value the kind of professionalism and expertise that makes this establishment special." The comment was delivered with Elvis's characteristic charm, but Michael was beginning to sense that this wasn't a casual celebrity drop-in. Elvis's mention of overhearing the conversation suggested that he understood exactly what was being discussed, and his reference to valuing professionalism and expertise carried an implicit criticism of the decision being made. "Mr. Sullivan is indeed a valued employee," Michael said carefully, "which is why we're offering him such an attractive retirement package. We want to make sure he's properly recognized for his years of service." Elvis nodded thoughtfully, as if considering Michael's explanation. "That's very generous. I'm curious though, what made you decide that now was the right time for Frank to retire? Has his performance declined in some way?" The question put Michael in an uncomfortable position because he couldn't cite any performance issues with Frank's work. The decision to push Frank toward retirement had been based entirely on cost considerations and Michael's assumption that older workers were inherently less valuable than younger ones. "It's not about performance," Michael said, struggling to find language that would justify the decision without revealing its discriminatory nature. "It's about positioning the hotel for the future, ensuring that we have a workforce that can adapt to changing guest expectations and technological innovations." Elvis's expression remained pleasant, but his next question cut to the heart of Michael's reasoning. What specific technological innovations or changing guest expectations require Frank to retire? "From my perspective as a guest, his service has always been exceptional," Michael found himself unable to provide a coherent answer because there was no legitimate business reason for forcing Frank's retirement other than the desire to reduce payroll costs by replacing an experienced, well-compensated employee with cheaper alternatives. "Well," Michael said uncomfortably, "it's more about overall workforce optimization and creating opportunities for advancement among younger staff members." "I see," Elvis said, his tone suggesting that he saw quite clearly what was really happening. "So this isn't about Frank's performance or capabilities. It's about your preference for younger employees." The directness of Elvis's question made it impossible for Michael to continue hiding behind euphemisms and corporate speak. He was being forced to acknowledge that his decision was based on age discrimination rather than legitimate business considerations. Frank, meanwhile, was watching this exchange with amazement. He had never expected anyone, let alone a celebrity of Elvis's stature, to step in and challenge a management decision that affected his future. For the first time in weeks, he felt like someone was recognizing his value and defending his right to be treated with dignity and respect. "Mr. Carter," Elvis continued, "I'm curious about something. How long have you been working at this hotel?" "6 months," Michael replied, clearly uncomfortable with where this line of questioning was heading. "And Frank, how long have you been here?" 23 years, Mr. Presley," Frank said, his voice carrying a pride that had been absent during his conversation with Michael. Elvis nodded approvingly. 23 years of experience versus 6 months of management theory. That's an interesting basis for deciding who has more value to the hotel's future success. The comparison was devastating because it highlighted the absurdity of a manager with 6 months of experience determining that an employee with 23 years of proven performance was no longer valuable to the organization. "Frank," Elvis said, turning his attention to the veteran bellhop, "I'm curious about your perspective on the changes you've seen in the hospitality industry over the past 2 decades. What have you learned about guest service that might not be obvious to someone newer to the business?" The question gave Frank an opportunity to demonstrate the depth of his knowledge and experience, something that Michael had never bothered to explore during his 6 months of management. "I've learned that exceptional service isn't about following procedures," Frank said, his confidence returning as he talked about his area of expertise. "It's about understanding people as individuals, anticipating their needs before they have to ask, and creating experiences that make them feel valued and cared for." Elvis nodded with obvious interest and respect. "Can you give me an example of how that works in practice?" Frank smiled, warming to a subject he was passionate about. "Every guest has different preferences and needs, even if they don't explicitly state them. Mrs. Henderson, who's been staying here twice a year for the past 15 years, always requests a room on the east side because she likes to watch the sunrise. Mr. Rodriguez prefers his newspaper folded in a specific way, and his coffee at exactly 7:15 a.m. The Williams family needs connecting rooms but doesn't want to be near the elevator because their youngest child is a light sleeper." "And you remember all these preferences?" Elvis asked. "Not just remember them," Frank replied. "I maintain detailed notes on every regular guest's preferences, special occasions, family changes, business needs. When they call to make a reservation, we can anticipate their needs before they have to explain them again." Elvis turned back to Michael with obvious appreciation for Frank's explanation. "That sounds like exactly the kind of personalized service that would keep guests coming back year after year. Is that the kind of institutional knowledge you're planning to replace with younger employees?" Michael was beginning to realize that he had never fully understood what Frank contributed to the hotel's success, because he had never bothered to learn about the complex relationship management and detailed service coordination that Frank handled seamlessly. "I hadn't considered the full scope of Mr. Sullivan's responsibilities," Michael admitted reluctantly. "That's understandable," Elvis said diplomatically. "It takes time to appreciate the complexity of what experienced professionals do, especially when they make it look effortless." Elvis then addressed both men with the tone of someone sharing important wisdom. In my experience, the most successful organizations are those that find ways to combine the energy and fresh perspectives of younger workers with the wisdom and institutional knowledge of experienced professionals. He gestured toward Frank. Frank represents something that can't be replaced by hiring someone younger and cheaper. He represents relationships, knowledge, and expertise that took decades to develop. That's not a liability, that's a competitive advantage. Elvis's attention returned to Michael. Michael, you represent innovation, efficiency, and new approaches to old problems. That's also valuable, but not as a replacement for experience, as a complement to it. The distinction Elvis was drawing between replacement and complementarity was crucial to understanding why the forced retirement approach was both wasteful and counterproductive. What if Elvis suggested, instead of seeing Frank's experience as something to eliminate, you saw it as something to leverage? What if Frank's institutional knowledge could be combined with your management innovations to create something better than either approach alone? The suggestion represented a completely different way of thinking about the generational conflict that had been framed as a zero-sum competition between old and new approaches to hospitality management. Michael looked thoughtful as he considered Elvis's perspective. You're suggesting a collaborative approach rather than a replacement strategy. Exactly, Elvis confirmed. Frank knows things about guest service that can't be learned from textbooks or training programs. You know things about organizational efficiency and modern management that Frank might not have encountered. Both types of knowledge are valuable. Frank was listening to this exchange with growing hope that there might be an alternative to forced retirement, that his experience might be valued rather than discarded, and that he might have a future at the hotel that honored his contributions rather than dismissing them. But what about cost considerations? Michael asked. The retirement package would reduce our payroll costs significantly. Elvis nodded, acknowledging the legitimate concern about operational expenses. That's a fair question. But I wonder if you've calculated the full cost of losing Frank's expertise and relationships versus the savings from his salary. The question forced Michael to consider aspects of Frank's value that didn't appear on the spreadsheets that had driven his decision-making process. What do you mean? Michael asked. Well, Elvis said, how much revenue comes from guests who return specifically because of the personalized service that Frank provides? How much would it cost to rebuild the relationships and institutional knowledge that would walk out the door with Frank? How much business might be lost if service quality declines because his expertise isn't available to train and guide newer employees? These were calculations that Michael had never performed because his focus had been entirely on the immediate cost savings from eliminating Frank's salary without considering the longer-term impact on revenue and service quality. I hadn't analyzed those factors, Michael admitted. That's understandable, Elvis said. It's easier to measure costs than to measure the value of relationships and institutional knowledge. But just because something is harder to measure doesn't mean it's less important. Elvis then addressed Frank directly. Frank, I'm curious about your perspective on this situation. If you were asked to help train and mentor younger employees while continuing to handle your current responsibilities, would that be something you'd be interested in? Frank's face lit up with enthusiasm. Absolutely, Mr. Presley. I've always enjoyed helping newer employees understand the nuances of guest service. There's so much that can only be learned through experience and observation. Elvis turned back to Michael. What if Frank's role evolved to include formal mentorship and training responsibilities alongside his current duties? That way, his institutional knowledge could be transferred to newer employees while maintaining the high service standards that established guests expect. The suggestion offered a path forward that addressed both Michael's concerns about organizational development and Frank's desire to continue contributing meaningfully to the hotel's success. Michael was beginning to see possibilities that hadn't occurred to him when he was focused solely on cost reduction and workforce optimization. That could actually solve several problems at once, he said thoughtfully. How so? Elvis asked, encouraging Michael to articulate the benefits of a collaborative approach. Well, Michael said, working through the implications, we could maintain our institutional knowledge while developing newer employees more effectively. Frank's experience could help us avoid service mistakes that might cost us guest relationships, and we could create a more structured approach to professional development that might improve employee retention. Elvis nodded approvingly. Those all sound like significant advantages over the replacement approach. Frank was listening to this conversation with increasing excitement as he realized that there might be a future for him at the hotel that valued his experience rather than discarding it. What would something like that look like in practice? Frank asked. Michael, now thinking creatively rather than defensively, began outlining possibilities. You could work with our newer bellhops and front desk staff to help them understand guest preferences and relationship management. You could help develop training materials that capture your institutional knowledge. You could serve as a mentor for employees who are struggling with the more complex aspects of guest service. And Elvis added, Frank could help Michael understand which traditional practices are worth preserving and which ones might benefit from innovation. Experience and fresh thinking working together. The conversation had transformed from a forced retirement discussion into a creative problem-solving session that recognized the value of both generational perspectives. Frank felt a renewed sense of purpose and value as he realized that his experience was being seen as an asset rather than a liability. Michael was beginning to understand that his role as a manager could involve leveraging existing strengths rather than simply replacing them with new approaches. This is exactly the kind of thinking that creates exceptional organizations, Elvis observed. When you stop seeing different generations as competitors and start seeing them as collaborators, you can achieve things that neither group could accomplish alone. The lesson Elvis was teaching extended far beyond the immediate situation with Frank and Michael. He was demonstrating a philosophy of leadership that valued wisdom alongside innovation, that saw diversity of experience as strength rather than inefficiency, and that understood that the best solutions often came from combining different perspectives rather than choosing one over another. Frank, Elvis said, your 23 years of experience represent an investment that the hotel has already made in your development. Throwing away that investment doesn't make financial sense, even from a purely business perspective. And Michael, Elvis continued, your fresh perspective and management training represent exactly the kind of innovation that can help established organizations adapt to changing conditions. But innovation works best when it's built on a foundation of proven practices and institutional knowledge. Both men were beginning to understand that their apparent conflict had been based on a false choice between experience and innovation, when the real opportunity lay in combining their different strengths. The meeting continued for another hour as the three men worked through the practical details of how Frank's role could evolve to include formal mentorship responsibilities while maintaining his guest service duties. They discussed training programs, knowledge transfer processes, and performance metrics that would measure both service quality and employee development outcomes. By the end of the conversation, Frank had been offered a promotion to Senior Guest Services Coordinator with explicit mentorship responsibilities, a salary increase that reflected his expanded role, and recognition as the hotel's institutional memory keeper. Michael had gained a valuable colleague whose experience could help him avoid costly mistakes while implementing necessary innovations. The transformation of their relationship from adversarial to collaborative became a model for how the hotel handled all generational transitions moving forward. Instead of forcing experienced employees into retirement, management began developing programs that paired veteran workers with newer employees in mentorship relationships that benefited both groups. Frank's new role proved to be enormously successful. His formal mentorship of younger employees resulted in faster training, better guest relationships, and higher employee retention rates. The institutional knowledge he shared through training materials and one-on-one coaching helped maintain service standards while allowing for innovation and efficiency improvements. Michael's management approach evolved to incorporate respect for experience alongside his drive for modernization. He learned to see institutional knowledge as a competitive advantage rather than a barrier to progress, and his decisions became more nuanced as he understood the complex relationships and traditions that made the hotel successful. The story of Elvis's intervention in Frank's forced retirement became legendary among hotel staff and eventually spread throughout the hospitality industry as an example of how generational conflicts could be resolved through collaboration rather than competition. Elvis continued to stay at the hotel regularly, often taking time to check on Frank's progress in his expanded role and Michael's development as a more thoughtful and inclusive leader. The relationship between the three men became an ongoing demonstration of how mutual respect and creative problem-solving could transform potential conflicts into opportunities for growth and improvement. Years later, when Frank finally chose to retire at age 75, he left behind a comprehensive training program, detailed guest preference databases, and a new generation of hotel employees who understood that exceptional service required both technical skills and human wisdom. Michael, by then the hotel's general manager, had become known throughout the industry for his innovative approach to integrating experienced workers with newer employees in mutually beneficial partnerships. The lesson that Elvis taught that day in Michael's office, that wisdom and innovation were complementary rather than competing forces, became a guiding principle not just for the Las Vegas International Hotel, but for organizations throughout the hospitality industry that learned to value experience alongside efficiency. The documentary about the transformation, produced 10 years later, became a landmark study in workplace age discrimination and intergenerational collaboration. The film featured extensive interviews with Frank, Michael, and other employees who had witnessed the dramatic shift from forced retirement policies to collaborative mentorship programs. Frank, who had finally chosen voluntary retirement at 75 after 8 additional years of meaningful contribution, spoke movingly about how Elvis's intervention had saved not just his job, but his sense of dignity and purpose. His mentorship program had trained over 50 hotel employees, creating a legacy of service excellence that continued long after his departure. Elvis showed me that my experience wasn't just personal history, it was valuable institutional knowledge that could benefit others, Frank reflected. Instead of being discarded, I was given the opportunity to pass on what I had learned to a new generation of hospitality professionals. Michael, by then recognized as one of the industry's most innovative leaders in workforce development, credited Elvis's lesson with fundamentally changing his understanding of management. His approach to integrating experienced workers with newer employees had become a model studied by business schools and hospitality management programs worldwide. I thought leadership meant making tough decisions about who stayed and who went, Michael admitted in his interview. Elvis taught me that real leadership meant finding ways to leverage everyone's strengths to create something better than the sum of its parts. The hospitality industry began incorporating Elvis' principles of intergenerational collaboration into management training programs, emphasizing the value of combining institutional knowledge with innovative thinking. Hotels and restaurants implementing these approaches consistently achieved higher guest satisfaction ratings, lower employee turnover, and stronger financial performance than competitors who continued traditional age discrimination practices. Research conducted by Cornell University's School of Hotel Administration showed that properties employing formal mentorship programs, linking experienced workers with newer employees, experienced 23% lower training costs, 31% higher guest retention rates, and 18% improvement in service quality scores compared to establishments using traditional replacement-based workforce management. The story resonated particularly strongly with baby boomers facing age discrimination in their own careers, many of whom found inspiration in Frank's transformation from forced retiree to valued mentor. His experience became a symbol of hope for older workers who feared their experience would be dismissed in favor of younger, cheaper alternatives. The Frank Sullivan model of senior employee mentorship became standard practice throughout the Las Vegas hospitality market, with hotels competing to attract experienced workers who could provide the institutional knowledge and relationship management skills that younger employees needed to develop. Today, more than 40 years after that transformative conversation in Michael's office, the story continues to inspire leaders facing choices between efficiency and wisdom, cost-cutting and relationship building, innovation and institutional knowledge. Frank's success demonstrates that age can be an asset rather than liability when organizations learn to value experience alongside energy and innovation. The annual Frank Sullivan Memorial Awards, established by the American Hotel and Lodging Association in 1995, recognize hospitality professionals who have demonstrated exceptional mentorship and intergenerational collaboration. Recipients are honored for creating workplace cultures that value experience while embracing innovation, following the model that Frank and Michael pioneered at the Las Vegas International Hotel. Frank's detailed guest preference database, maintained over 23 years of service, became the foundation for the modern customer relationship management systems used throughout the hospitality industry. His meticulous records of guest preferences, special occasions, and service requirements demonstrated the commercial value of institutional memory and relationship management that younger employees might dismiss as outdated record-keeping. The training materials that Frank developed during his expanded mentorship role became industry-standard resources used in hospitality management programs worldwide. His guides for managing VIP relationships, handling delicate guest situations, and maintaining discretion in high-profile service scenarios are still referenced by hotel professionals seeking to understand the subtle arts of exceptional guest service. Michael's evolution from cost-focused manager to industry leader in workforce development influenced a generation of hospitality executives who learned to see employee retention and knowledge transfer as competitive advantages rather than operational expenses. His innovative programs for pairing experienced workers with newer employees became models for organizations seeking to capture institutional knowledge while embracing technological advancement. The partnership between Frank and Michael demonstrated that effective leadership required both the wisdom that comes from experience and the fresh perspectives that younger professionals bring to established organizations. Their collaboration proved that generational differences could be sources of strength rather than conflict when managed with mutual respect and creative problem-solving. The story of Elvis's intervention became a case study in conflict resolution and organizational development that extended far beyond the hospitality industry. Business schools, management consultants, and human resources professionals used Frank and Michael's transformation to teach principles of inclusive leadership, age diversity, and the strategic value of institutional knowledge. The Las Vegas International Hotel's approach to intergenerational workforce management became a benchmark for the industry, attracting both experienced professionals seeking mentorship opportunities and younger workers interested in learning from veteran colleagues. The hotel's reputation for employee development and collaborative culture made it a preferred destination for hospitality professionals at all career stages. Elvis's role in facilitating this transformation reinforced his reputation as someone who used his influence to create positive change that extended far beyond entertainment. His ability to recognize the value in both Frank's experience and Michael's innovation, and to help them find common ground, demonstrated the kind of leadership wisdom that emerged from his own experiences navigating the complex dynamics of the entertainment industry. The conversation that began with age discrimination and forced retirement became a foundation for workplace practices that honored both tradition and innovation, experience and energy, institutional knowledge and fresh thinking. It proved that the most successful organizations were those that found ways to leverage the full spectrum of their employees' capabilities rather than viewing different generations as competing forces. Frank Sullivan's legacy lives on in the hundreds of hospitality professionals he mentored, the thousands of guests who experienced exceptional service because of his knowledge and dedication, and the organizational practices that continue to demonstrate the strategic value of experience alongside innovation. His story remains a powerful reminder that wisdom accumulated over decades of dedicated service deserves respect, recognition, and integration into the ongoing success of any organization fortunate enough to possess such institutional treasure. The principles that emerged from Elvis's intervention, that experience and innovation could complement rather than compete with each other, that institutional knowledge represented competitive advantage rather than operational burden, and that effective leadership required understanding the full spectrum of employee capabilities, became foundational concepts in modern workforce management theory. Universities began incorporating the Frank Sullivan case study into their human resources and organizational behavior curricula, using the transformation from forced retirement to collaborative mentorship as an example of how creative leadership could solve complex workplace challenges while honoring the dignity and contributions of all employees regardless of their age or career stage. The success metrics from the Las Vegas International Hotel's intergenerational workforce programs were studied by researchers seeking to understand the quantifiable benefits of age-diverse workplace cultures. Their findings consistently showed that organizations implementing collaborative approaches to generational differences achieved superior performance outcomes across multiple measures including employee satisfaction, guest retention, service quality, and financial profitability. Frank's approach to guest relationship management, which emphasized personal attention, detailed preference tracking, and discretionary service delivery, became the template for luxury hospitality standards that emphasized human connection over technological efficiency. His methods demonstrated that exceptional service required both systematic processes and individual judgment that could only be developed through years of experience and relationship building. The partnership between Frank and Michael evolved into a model for professional mentorship that balanced respect for institutional knowledge with openness to innovative approaches. Their collaboration showed that effective intergenerational workplace relationships required mutual recognition of different strengths, willingness to learn from each other, and shared commitment to organizational excellence that transcended individual career ambitions. The transformation that began with Elvis's recognition of Frank's value and Michael's potential for growth became a landmark example of how individual acts of moral courage could create systemic change that benefited entire industries. The conversation in Michael's office proved that challenging unfair practices and advocating for inclusive treatment could generate positive outcomes that extended far beyond the immediate situation. Today, the story of Frank Sullivan, Michael Carter, and Elvis Presley continues to inspire leaders, employees, and organizations seeking to create workplace cultures that honor both tradition and innovation, experience and ambition, institutional knowledge and creative problem-solving. Their example demonstrates that the most successful organizations are those that recognize human capital as their most valuable asset and that invest in developing and leveraging the full range of capabilities that their employees bring to their shared mission of excellence. The hospitality management textbook Generational Leadership in Service Industries, published by Cornell University Press in 2010, dedicates an entire chapter to the Frank Sullivan transformation, analyzing how the intervention changed not just individual careers but industry-wide approaches to workforce development and age diversity management. The International Association of Hotel General Managers established the Elvis Presley Award for Ethical Leadership in 1995, recognizing executives who demonstrate courage in challenging discriminatory practices and creating inclusive workplace cultures. The award specifically honors leaders who find innovative solutions to generational conflicts while maintaining operational excellence and guest service standards. Frank's detailed service protocols developed during his mentorship years became the foundation for the Sullivan standards adopted by luxury hotel chains worldwide. These standards emphasize the irreplaceable value of personal relationships, institutional memory, and the kind of intuitive guest service that can only be developed through years of experience and careful observation. The training academy that bears Frank's name, established at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas in 2005, continues to educate hospitality professionals in the principles of intergenerational collaboration and experience-based service excellence. Students learn not just technical skills but also the wisdom traditions that Frank represented and the innovative management approaches that Michael pioneered. Michael's career trajectory from cost-cutting operations manager to internationally recognized expert in workforce diversity became a case study in professional growth and leadership development. His consulting firm, Carter Collaborative Solutions, has helped hundreds of organizations implement age-inclusive employment practices that leverage experience while embracing innovation. The economic impact of the Las Vegas International Hotel's transformation extended far beyond the single property where Elvis's intervention occurred. Other hotels implementing similar intergenerational collaboration programs reported average increases of 28% in guest satisfaction scores, 35% improvement in employee retention rates, and 22% growth in repeat business, demonstrating the quantifiable benefits of respecting and integrating experienced workers rather than discarding them. Research conducted by the Society for Human Resource Management found that companies following the Elvis model of generational integration experienced significantly lower rates of age discrimination lawsuits, higher employee engagement scores across all age groups, and more effective knowledge transfer between retiring workers and their successors. The conversation that began with "you're too old for this job" became a catalyst for industry-wide recognition that age discrimination was not only morally wrong but economically counterproductive. Organizations that learned to value institutional knowledge alongside operational efficiency consistently outperformed competitors who continued to prioritize youth over experience. Frank Sullivan's story resonates particularly strongly in today's economy, where experienced workers face increasing pressure to retire early, while organizations struggle with knowledge management and relationship continuity challenges. His transformation from forced retiree to valued mentor provides a roadmap for companies seeking to retain institutional knowledge while adapting to changing market conditions. The partnership between Frank and Michael demonstrates that successful intergenerational collaboration requires mutual respect, creative problem-solving, and recognition that different generations bring complementary strengths to organizational challenges. Their relationship proves that age diversity, like other forms of workplace diversity, creates competitive advantages when managed thoughtfully and inclusively. Elvis's role in facilitating this transformation reinforced his legacy as someone who used his platform to create positive change that extended far beyond entertainment. His intervention showed that individual acts of moral courage could generate systemic improvements that benefited countless people in ways that the original participants could never have anticipated. The principles established in that Las Vegas hotel office continue to influence workplace practices, legal frameworks, and cultural attitudes toward aging and employment. The story serves as a reminder that challenging discrimination and advocating for inclusive treatment creates value that extends far beyond the immediate situation to benefit entire industries and communities. The transformation that Elvis witnessed and facilitated represents more than just a successful resolution to a workplace conflict. It demonstrates how individual moral courage can create ripple effects that extend far beyond the original participants to influence entire industries and generations of workers who benefit from more inclusive and respectful employment practices. Frank Sullivan's journey from forced retirement candidate to valued mentor became a symbol of hope for millions of experienced workers who face age discrimination in their careers. His story proves that professional value isn't diminished by age, but can actually increase when experience is properly recognized, respected, and integrated into organizational development strategies. Michael Carter's evolution from inexperienced cost-cutter to thoughtful leader shows that effective management requires understanding the full spectrum of employee capabilities rather than making decisions based solely on demographic characteristics or financial spreadsheets that fail to capture the true value of institutional knowledge and relationship capital. The collaboration between Frank and Michael established principles that continue to guide organizations seeking to create workplace cultures that honor both innovation and tradition, efficiency and wisdom, cost-effectiveness and human dignity. Their partnership proved that generational differences could be sources of organizational strength when managed with creativity, respect, and commitment to shared excellence. Elvis Presley's intervention transformed what could have been a simple case of age discrimination into a masterclass in inclusive leadership and ethical decision-making. His recognition of both Frank's irreplaceable experience and Michael's potential for growth created a solution that benefited everyone involved while establishing practices that would influence the hospitality industry for decades to come. The story of that conversation in the Las Vegas International Hotel office continues to inspire leaders, employees, and organizations committed to creating workplaces where people of all ages can contribute their unique strengths to shared missions of excellence. proving that the most successful organizations are those that learn to leverage the full range of human capabilities rather than limiting themselves through discrimination or narrow definitions of professional value.